obviously far knowledgeable about the subject. I've been following the negotiation process in the past months, and I've come to this the point at which actually all parties have recognized that the territories, somehow implicitly recognized that all territories that have been taken by Russia will remain Russian at the end of this process.
Well, for the foreseeable future, yeah. I mean, who knows what will happen in no one can know what will happen in the future. I mean, things can change radically in the future. I think many Ukrainians think the change, they may not be able to change things on the battlefield and return Crimea or return the East, but they think that eventually the change will come in Moscow, and that if things change in Moscow, then things can change in Ukraine as well. I mean, they do that from a kind of historical, they have this kind of historical memory, and they think, well, the history of Ukraine was changed by, I mean, obviously all sorts of things, but things which ultimately happened in Moscow and Russia. For example, the revolution in 1917, for example, and something which didn't happen in Ukraine. I mean, it happened in Russia. Then you had, unexpected events like Chernobyl, which obviously is in Ukraine, but which was one of the factors which led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. But the collapse of the Soviet Union came, happened in Moscow eventually. Moscow, right. And then the whole history of Ukraine changed overnight, but by things which happened kind of in Moscow. And so they think, well, that's what will happen again.
Now, the 21st century war is seen in a dramatically new fashion in Ukraine. We suddenly see a trenches war, what started as a trenches war in eastern Ukraine, and rapidly developed into a drone war.
What's really incredible is just how fast technology has changed warfare, and that's what I've seen. I think people don't quite understand. If you haven't seen it, it's very hard to kind of understand how quickly things have changed. So, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we're still talking about tanks and armored and anti-tank weapons, things which are kind of familiar to people here because of the wars in former Yugoslavia, and no one really knew what a drone was, kind of like 4 years ago. And it's incredible how quickly that changed. So, as a journalist, in the beginning, it was very important to get to the closest part to the front you could get to report. And at some point it became frustrating because you couldn't get permissions to go, etc. And so you could get quite close, but you couldn't get to the front. And then about 2 years ago now, I began to realize that it didn't matter anymore because the people that you needed to speak to, the commanders, were not there anymore at the front. They were like 10 kilometers behind, 20 kilometers behind, 30 kilometers behind, even more, in a bunker, underneath, and in a nuclear bunker underneath an old Soviet factory, or in a house 20 kilometers from the front, sitting there with walls covered with screens, with kind of iPads, with with laptops. And it's just incredible how partly, we talked about demography, partly driven by demography. It was like lack of men accelerated this technological development. And it's just changed so, incredibly fast. It's really quite incredible to go to, to sit in one of those bunkers and you see, first of all, you've got 24/7, this kind of live coverage of everything that's happening on the front. These men are sitting there, watching on their screens, and suddenly you see a Russian pop up, run along the road, doing something, and the Ukrainian commander is going, get him, and then the attack drones kind of go out and they try to hit that target. Then you've got this kind of element of electronic warfare. So you develop drones and you have electronic warfare to jam the drones. Then you have the sort of next generation. Then you have drones which are basically attached, fiber optic drones which are attached like a kite to a sort of cable, because then they're not vulnerable to electronic warfare. Things are changing incredibly quickly. And one of the things that I think kind of has now become clear, hopefully to Western militaries, is that the old systems of procurement, which are hopelessly kind of outdated, in the sense that that you decided what you wanted and then you ordered it, and it would take years and years, and then eventually your tank or your plane would arrive. So now what's happened in Ukraine, and what you can see, is that, for example, with a particular type of drone, for example, these are developed. You have a kind of unit which has developed a relationship with a startup drone company, which is delivering the drone. They can order it through the military procurement system, but through on their computer. But they can order their drone or their technology or whatever it is. The engineers from the company that make it and the military and the soldiers are working together. So they literally. I mean, I've been
assembled it together.
Well, it's not that they assemble it. That's not the issue. Yeah. It's like it's not that. It's that for example, I went recently to see a company was delivering a kind of mid-range drone. So you've got kind of drones which, like the Russians used to attack Kiev, or Ukrainians attack something which is 1,800 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers away. There's a long-range range. And you've got these so-called first-person view drones which attack, 5, 10, 15 kilometers along the front, making it a kind of kill zone, so it's very hard to move. But then I went to see a company which was delivering these drones which have a kind of longer range. They're like for 60 kilometers range, okay? So these guys from this company were delivering like 4 or 5 drones. Soldiers came from their positions to see the final tests. But why is that important? Because it means that the soldiers coming from the front are telling the engineers, this works, this doesn't work. So it means that if something doesn't work, or they say, we need you to do this, you have a turnaround time of 6 weeks. So things are being updated in this kind of 6-week cycle. But until now, military technology being updated, we're talking years and years and years. But this is like going at kind of warp speed. It's just really incredible how it's changing. So you might think, well, okay, but the Russians are still advancing a bit. Fine, well, they are advancing a little bit. But what's really incredible also is that you've got this kind of mixture between a kind of First World War kind of trenches system and the 21st century. So in that sense, that you can see everything that's happening, you can hit anything that moves, but what's happening with why the Russians have got the edge and able to move a little bit is because they are prepared to sacrifice thousands and thousands of men. And it's just incredible how much the Russians are prepared to take, how many casualties they're prepared to take. And Ukrainians they almost don't understand it. They're going like, we just see these men coming out and kind of moving forward and
into the meat grinder.
And literally, it's not an exaggeration when they say it. You could just see it. It's really incredible. But it's this combination of high tech and kind of the First World War. But it means that a lot of kind of traditional, how we traditionally thought of war has changed. The wars and the way that the wars were fought here in Kosovo and in Bosnia and Croatia. It doesn't, in the sense of how they were fought, it's not like 30 years ago. It feels like kind of 300 years ago, because the technology has changed so much. For example, it's not just on land. On the Black Sea, it can be forgotten that the Ukrainians have literally driven the Russia's famous vaunted Black Sea fleet out of their part of the Black Sea. And what we've seen now, and what we've seen kind of tankers being attacked in the last couple of weeks, is the development of sea drones. This is to do with sea drones, unmanned craft, which can either be used as suicide kind of vessels, or these are kind of vessels which can be adapted, which can go, like 100 kilometers, and then you've got kind of flying drones, which then take off from them and attack. So this stuff is going incredibly fast, but it means that like traditional naval ships that we've seen we've traditionally had are obsolete, or in the ways that we have had them in the past up until now have been obsolete. So you've got a kind of modern arms race, but the most important part of this arms race, which the Ukrainians are racing in, Russians are racing in, Chinese, Americans, everyone is after the sort of holy grail of full AI automated drones. So what does that mean today? It means that one person, a pilot, is flying kind of one drone, either on his computer or he's got a kind of goggles like he's playing a kind of video game. But eventually, what the aim is that you've got some AI which has been now introduced, but it's kind of the first generation. But what they foresee is that eventually you can have one pilot in charge of 3,000 drones. So people here in this region had better realize that as well. Yeah. It's like, one day you might have, one person with 3,000 drones. It's like, how do you shoot them down? You can't. It's like, it's really going to be, it's a new world. Militarily, it's a new world. And everyone is, it doesn't make men redundant at all, because you still need men, but it's just, technology has changed.
It's a counter-strike war.
Well, yes, it's just kind of, but it's moving incredibly fast.
Yeah. If there were a peace agreement today, not a peace agreement, but an agreement that stops the war, something like the Bosnian agreement, which was not a peace agreement, the Dayton agreement, but basically something that stopped the war and created some conditions for peaceful transformation. But it wouldn't be like Bosnia, because those territories wouldn't be those Russian-occupied territories would not be part of a unified state. They wouldn't. No, what I meant was in the sense of these territories. There's a recognition of territories taken by force, the same way that what happened in Dayton, basically. And it legalizes the present state of affairs, except that those territories go to Russia.
But de facto, as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, the Ukrainians will never recognize de jure that they had gone to Russia.